Silent Cowboy welcomed a pregnant stranger, then found her baby carried his name. She didn't speak when she arrived, but neither did he. A dusty trail, a torn dress, a woman alone, carrying more than fear in her belly. The Silent Cowboy took her in, like he'd done with stray animals and broken fences. No questions, no promises. But as days passed and her labor drew near, something in her story didn't sit right. Why did the name she whispered in her sleep match the one on his father's grave? And how could the child she carried already bear the name he'd tried so hard to forget? This isn't just a tale of kindness. It's a reckoning wrapped in silence, blood and fate. Dry Hollow, a town that lived up to its name in many ways, was mercilessly beaten down by the West Texas sun. Dust devils danced between weathered buildings, and hope was as scarce as water in August. People in Dry Hollow kept their secrets hidden, fostering a culture of self-restraint. Caleb Boone understood that better than most. He hadn't spoken a word in 5 years, not since the fire that took his family and left him with scars that ran deeper than the ones marking his hands. The townsfolk had grown used to his silence, to the way he'd appear at dawn for supplies and vanish before the shopkeeper could attempt conversation. He lived 10 miles out, in a cabin built from the charred remains of his family's ranch house. He lived alone, except for a paint horse named Ghost and the memories that haunted him both awake and asleep. It was a life stripped down to its bones. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. No complications, no connections. There were no opportunities for further loss or complications. That's how he preferred it. This was exactly the way he needed it to be. But on this particular October afternoon, as he rode into town for his monthly supplies, fate had other plans. The universe, it seemed, had grown tired of his self-imposed exile. She stumbled into Dry Hollow from the south, where the desert stretched endlessly toward Mexico. There was no horse, no wagon, just a pregnant woman in a once blue dress now the color of dust and desperation. Her dark hair hung in tangles, her feet were bare and bleeding, and her arms wrapped protectively around a belly that spoke of life persisting despite everything. The sheriff, Tom Bradley, rode past without slowing. Not his problem. Pregnant drifters brought trouble, and Tom Bradley avoided trouble that didn't pay. Reverend Hutchins stood outside his church, saw her coming, and raised his voice in practiced condemnation. "This is a God-fearing town. We don't harbor harlots and their bastards." The woman didn't react, didn't plead. She continued to walk, each stride driven by determination, until she arrived at the watering trough in the town center. There, as if she'd finally reached some invisible finish line, her strength gave out. She crumpled to the dust, one hand still protecting her unborn child, even as consciousness fled. The good citizens of Dry Hollow stepped around her like she was a stone in the road. It was always someone else's problem. It was always someone else's problem. But Caleb Boone had stopped being one of the good citizens of Dry Hollow 5 years ago. He dismounted from Ghost in one fluid motion, his spurs singing a lonely tune against the packed earth. Without hesitation, without a word, he never spoke. Anyway, he knelt beside the fallen woman, checked for a pulse, found it fluttering like a trapped bird. He observed the advanced stage of her pregnancy, the dehydration and the numerous minor wounds, all of which indicated a challenging journey. Then, as naturally as breathing, he lifted her into his arms. She weighed nothing, or maybe grief had made him stronger than he knew. Either way, he carried her to his wagon, laid her carefully among the supplies he'd just purchased, and turned, Ghost, toward home. The townspeople watched in shock. Caleb Boone, who wouldn't so much as nod at his neighbors, was taking in a stranger. The stranger was a pregnant woman. The woman had fallen ill. "Fool," someone muttered. But Caleb was already gone, heading back to his sanctuary with a burden he hadn't asked for but couldn't ignore. As the wagon rolled away, the woman stirred slightly, her lips moving in unconscious speech. If anyone had been close enough to hear, they would have caught a single word, repeated like a prayer or a curse. Eli, Eli, Eli. But only Caleb heard it, and the name hit him like a physical blow. His hands tightened on the reins, knuckles white beneath the scars. Eli. This was the name he had been attempting to forget for 5 years, the name on a grave behind his cabin. The name of a ghost that refused to stay buried. The woman in his wagon carried more than a child. She carried the past Caleb had been running from, though neither of them knew it yet. Fate, it seemed, had finally caught up with the silent cowboy of Dry Hollow. Caleb's cabin sat in a valley between two ridges, hidden from casual view and accessible only by a trail he'd deliberately kept rough. The main room was sparse: a bed, a table, 2 chairs, though he'd only ever needed one, and a stone fireplace that had been built from the original ranch house's foundation. No decorations, no comforts, nothing that suggested a life beyond. Mere survival. He carried the unconscious woman inside, laying her gently on his bed. In the fading afternoon light, he could see her more clearly. Young, maybe 22 or 23. Her face, beneath the dirt and exhaustion, had a delicate beauty that spoke of different origins than the hardscrabble frontier. Her hands, though roughened by recent trials, showed signs of once knowing easier work. Caleb worked with practiced efficiency. Water first, cleaning the worst of the dust from her face and hands. Her feet were in bad shape. Cuts, thorns, blisters from walking God knew how far. He tended them as he would ghosts' hooves, with careful attention and surprising gentleness. She wore no wedding ring, no jewelry at all except, there, a thin chain around her neck, disappearing beneath her dress. He left it alone. Everyone deserved their secrets. As he worked, she murmured in her sleep, Spanish sometimes, English others, names and places that meant nothing to him, but always, like a refrain, that one name: Eli. The baby moved visibly beneath her dress, and Caleb found himself remembering his mother, pregnant with what would have been his youngest sibling before the fire took them all. He pushed the memory away, focusing on the task at hand. It was while adjusting her position, trying to make her more comfortable, that something fell from a hidden pocket in her skirts. A photograph, folded and worn from handling. It landed face up on the floor, and Caleb's world tilted off its axis. The image showed a young man, perhaps 18 or 19, standing proudly in what looked like a military uniform. Confederate gray, though the war had been over for nearly 15 years. The face was handsome, smiling, full of life and possibility. It was Eli, his younger brother, the brother who'd left to join a cattle drive to Kansas 10 years ago and never returned. The brother whose empty grave sat behind the cabin, marked with stones and regret. Caleb's legs gave out. He sat hard on the floor, staring at the photograph with hands that shook for the first time in 5 years. How did this woman have Eli's picture? Why was she carrying it like a talisman? And why, God, why was she saying his name in her sleep? He looked from the photograph to the woman's face, searching for answers in her unconscious features. Now that he looked closer, really looked, there was something familiar about the shape of her mouth, the line of her jaw. Not Eli's features, but reminiscent somehow. The baby moved again, a foot or elbow pressing against the confines of the womb. Soon, Caleb realized, very soon this child would enter the world, and with it would come questions he wasn't sure he was ready to answer. But first, the woman needed to survive. He could see the signs of early labor, the way she shifted restlessly, the occasional tightening of her belly, the sweat that had nothing to do with fever. Whatever story she carried, whatever connection she had to his lost brother, would have to wait. Caleb picked up the photograph, studying it one more time before carefully placing it on the table. Eli's face smiled up at him, frozen in a moment, before everything went wrong, before the fire, before the guilt, before the silence that had become Caleb's only companion. Outside, night was falling. In the bed, the woman stirred, her eyes moving beneath closed lids. Soon she would wake and the questions would begin. But Caleb had spent 5 years perfecting the art of not answering, of letting his silence speak for him. What he didn't know was that some silences were meant to be broken, and the woman in his bed carried the key to unlocking the words he'd buried with his family. A coyote howled in the distance, and Ghost whinnied nervously in the corral. The night was full of omens, but Caleb had stopped believing in signs the night he'd failed to save his family. He simply sat by the bed, watching over a stranger who somehow carried his brother's memory, and waited for whatever revelation dawn would bring. She woke with Eli's name on her lips, screaming it into the darkness like a drowning woman calling for rescue. Eli, Eli, no, the fire, you promised you'd come back. Caleb was beside her instantly, his calloused hands gentle as he offered water. She drank greedily, then seemed to fully wake, taking in her surroundings with eyes that went from confused to terrified. Where? Her voice cracked. She tried again. Where am I? Caleb pointed to himself, then gestured around the cabin, trying to convey safety without words. She watched his hands, understanding dawning. You don't speak? She asked softly. He shook his head, then pointed to his throat and made a cutting motion. Let her think he was mute by injury rather than choice. It was easier than the truth. You saved me. It wasn't a question. I remember falling. The town. Her face darkened. They wouldn't help, but you did. She tried to sit up, gasped as pain rippled across her belly. Caleb steadied her, his touch careful but firm. Her eyes met his, and he saw something there, not just gratitude, but recognition of some kind. Your eyes, she whispered. God in heaven, you have his eyes. Before Caleb could react, another contraction hit. She gripped his hand with surprising strength, breathing through the pain. When it passed, she looked at him with a mixture of fear and determination. The baby's coming soon. I can feel it. I've been running for days, trying to get here. Trying to find... She stopped, seeming to realize she was saying too much. My name is Rosa Martinez. Caleb nodded, filling a basin with clean water, gathering clean cloths. He'd helped deliver calves and foals, but this was different. I was looking for someone, Rosa continued, speaking to fill the silence, or perhaps to distract from the pain. Someone who used to live in these parts, someone who promised... Another contraction cut off her words. When it passed, she reached for something. The photograph. Panic flashed across her face when she couldn't find it. Caleb retrieved it from the table, handed it to her. She clutched it like a lifeline. You know him, she said, studying Caleb's face. It wasn't a question. I can see it. The eyes, the jaw. Your brothers. Caleb's hands stilled. He'd been preparing another cloth, but now he stood frozen, caught between denial and the first real human connection he'd allowed in 5 years. Eli Boone, Rosa said, watching him carefully. That's who you are, isn't it? His brother? The one he talked about. Caleb. Hearing his name spoken aloud after so long was like being struck by lightning. Caleb stepped back, shaking his head, pointing to the door. She should leave. This was too much, too close to things better left buried. But Rosa was already in the grip of another contraction, and this one was different, stronger. Final preparations beginning. She reached for his hand again, and her touch burned through his defenses. Please, she gasped. I know you don't speak. Eli told me about the fire, about what happened. But please, I need help. The baby needs help. Eli's baby needs help. Eli's baby. The words hung in the air like smoke from an old fire. Caleb stared at Rosa, at her swollen belly, at the photograph of his brother, and felt 5 years of carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. His brother's child, his nephew or niece. Family when he'd thought all family was ash and memory. Rosa screamed as the next contraction hit and instinct overrode emotion. Caleb moved with purpose, helping her into a better position, checking. The progress with clinical detachment born of necessity. The baby was coming whether he was ready or not. The past was arriving with the future, and all he could do was catch it when it fell. The contractions were coming faster now, and Rosa gripped Caleb's hand like it was the only solid thing in a world gone liquid with pain. Between the waves, she talked, maybe to distract herself, maybe to fill the silence that Caleb carried, like armor. I met him in San Antonio, she gasped. After the drive, he had money from the cattle, was going to come back here, rebuild the ranch. But then he got word about the fire, about your family. Caleb's jaw tightened. Eli had known and hadn't come home. He went wild with grief, Rosa continued, drinking, fighting. Said he should have been here, could have helped. The guilt was eating him alive. I was working at the boarding house where he stayed. We We found comfort in each other. Another contraction. Caleb helped her breathe through it, the way he'd seen his mother do with neighbor women. When it passed, Rosa's eyes were wet with more than pain. He talked about you constantly. His older brother who could do anything, fix anything, said you were the strongest man he knew. When he found out I was pregnant, he was so happy, said he was going to bring me here, make things right. But she didn't need to finish. But was a word that ended too many stories in the West. Bandits, she whispered. On the road between San Antonio and here, Eli fought them, gave me time to hide. They killed him for $40 and a horse. Caleb closed his eyes. All these years thinking Eli had abandoned them, chosen the freedom of the trail over family. But he'd been coming home, had died trying to come home. I buried him myself, Rosa said, marked the grave so I could find it again someday. Then I kept walking. Had to find you, had to tell you. She gripped his hand tighter as another contraction built. He said if anything happened, to find his brother Caleb, said you'd help, said you'd understand about protecting family. The contraction peaked, and Rosa bore down with a scream that echoed off the cabin walls. Caleb could see the baby crowning, dark hair already visible. Life insisting on itself despite all the death that had led to this moment. Almost there, he wanted to say, but the words stayed locked behind 5 years of silence. Instead, he squeezed her hand, nodded encouragingly, positioned himself to catch the baby when it came. The name, Rosa panted between pushes. Eli made me promise. If it's a boy, Eli William Boone Jr., after him and your father. So the name doesn't die. So something survives. Caleb's vision blurred. William Boone, their father, who'd built the ranch from nothing, who died trying to save their mother from the flames, and Eli, who died trying to come home. Names that deserved to live on, even if their bearers couldn't. With a final push and a cry that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul, Rosa delivered the baby into Caleb's waiting hands. A boy, small but perfect, already voicing his protest at the cold world he'd entered. Caleb cleared the baby's airways, cut the cord with his sharp knife, wrapped the infant in the cleanest cloth he had. The movements were automatic, learned from years of ranch life, but his hands shook as he placed the baby on Rosa's chest. She was crying, laughing, exhausted, but triumphant. Eli, she whispered to the baby, Eli William Boone Jr., your daddy. Would have loved you so much. Caleb stood frozen, watching this tableau. A woman he'd just met and a baby who carried his brother's name, his father's name, his family's blood. The silence that had protected him for 5 years suddenly felt like a prison. There were words fighting to escape, words that Rosa deserved to hear, that this baby would someday need to know. But still, they wouldn't come. Not yet. Maybe not. Ever. Rosa looked up at him, her dark eyes full of understanding. It's okay, she said softly. Eli told me about how you stopped talking after the fire. He said the words got burned up with everything else. But Caleb, you just delivered. Your nephew, you saved us both. That speaks louder than any words could. For 3 days, a fragile peace settled over the cabin. Rosa recovered slowly, and Caleb found himself adjusting to the rhythms of new life. The baby's cries, the need for warm water and clean cloths, the strange fullness that came from having others in his space. He'd set up a makeshift bed for himself by the fireplace, giving Rosa and little Eli the bed. At night he'd lie awake listening to the baby's breathing, remembering another time when his home had held such sounds. Before the fire, before the silence. Rosa was a good mother, patient and loving despite her exhaustion. She sang to the baby in Spanish, soft lullabies that made Caleb's chest ache with memory. His own mother had sung to them, though in English, and with an Irish lilt inherited from her parents. On the 4th morning, as Rosa nursed the baby and Caleb prepared breakfast, the sound of approaching horses shattered their quiet routine. Multiple horses, riding hard. Caleb moved to the window, his hand instinctively going to the rifle mounted above the fireplace. 3 men. The one in front was well-dressed, silver conchos on his saddle, expensive boots. The kind of man who had others do his dirty work. The two behind him were clearly that dirty work, armed, watchful, with the look of those who solved problems with bullets. "No," Rosa breathed, clutching the baby tighter. "He found me. I thought I'd covered my trail, but he found me." Caleb looked at her questioningly. "Marcus Valdez," she whispered. "Rich rancher from San Antonio. After Eli died, he decided he wanted me, said a young widow needed protection. When I refused, when I ran," her voice broke. "He says the baby is his, says I'm his property. He's been hunting me for months." The riders had reached the yard. Caleb checked his rifle, then held up a hand for Rosa to stay quiet. He stepped onto the porch, weapon held casually but ready. "Well, well," Valdez said, not bothering to dismount. "The silent hermit of Dry Hollow. Heard about you in town. They say you don't talk." His smile was cold. "Good. Makes this easier. I'm looking for stolen property. A woman, Mexican, pregnant, or recently delivered. By now. Seen anyone like that?" Caleb shook his head slowly. "Funny," Valdez continued. "Tracks led this direction. Fresh wagon tracks from town, where witnesses saw you pick up a fallen woman." He leaned forward in his saddle. "Now, I'm a reasonable man. I'll pay for information, or—" his hand moved to his gun. "We can do this the hard way." From inside came the unmistakable cry of a baby. Valdez's smile widened. "Ah, there we are. Boys, check the cabin." Caleb moved to block the door, rifle rising. The two gunmen went for their weapons, but Valdez held up a hand. "Now, no! Need for violence. You seem like a practical man even if you don't talk. That woman in there, she's a thief and a liar. Stole money from me, ran off with my child. I've got legal papers." He produced a document. "Judge in San Antonio signed. She's mine and so's the baby." Caleb didn't move. "One man against three," Valdez said conversationally. "You might get one of us, maybe two if you're lucky. But you'll die and we'll take them anyway. Is she worth dying for, a stranger?" From behind Caleb, Rosa's voice rang out clear and strong. "I'm not his. The baby isn't his. His name is Eli William Boone, Jr., and his father died an honest man." Valdez's face darkened. "Shut your mouth, woman. You're coming back with me one way or another." He looked at Caleb. "Last chance, hermit. Stand aside." Caleb made his choice. He'd failed to save his family once. He wouldn't fail again. The rifle in his hands was steady as he aimed it at Valdez's chest. His message was clear. "You'll have to go through me." "Your funeral," Valdez snarled, reaching for his gun. The standoff stretched taut as wire. 3 armed men against 1 silent cowboy. But Caleb had advantages they didn't know about. 5 years of living on this land, knowing every rock and shadow, and the kind of desperate determination that came from having nothing left to lose except what stood behind him. Before anyone could draw, Rosa's voice cut through the tension. "Wait, Marcus, wait. I'll come with you. Just don't hurt him. He doesn't even know me, just helped because that's the kind of man he is. Let me get the baby and—" "No tricks," Valdez warned. Rosa emerged from the cabin, little Eli wrapped in a blanket. But instead of walking toward Valdez, she moved to the side of the cabin toward the small cemetery Caleb had made for his family. "What are you doing?" Valdez demanded. I need to say goodbye to someone," Rosa said. "Please, then I'll come quietly." She walked among the graves. William Boone, Margaret Boone, Sarah Boone, aged 12, Thomas Boone, aged 8, and at the end, newer than the others, Eli W. Boone, lost, not forgotten. Rosa knelt at this last grave, and her words carried clear in the morning air. "I found him, mi amor. I found your brother like you asked. He's everything you said. Strong, kind, protective. He delivered our son with hands as gentle as yours were." Valdez had dismounted, following her, his men still covering Caleb. "Enough of this nonsense. This child," Rosa continued, louder now, "is Eli William Boone, Jr., son of Eli Boone, who died protecting me from bandits, nephew of Caleb Boone, on whose land we stand, grandson of William and Margaret Boone, who lie in these graves." She stood, turning to face them all, the baby held high. "This is his birthright. This land, this name, this family. And you, Marcus Valdez, have no claim here." "Legal papers say otherwise," Valdez snarled, but something had shifted. His men looked uneasy. Graveyards and family land carried weight in the West, a kind of sacred law that even outlaws respected. "Your papers are lies," Rosa said, "bought from a corrupt judge. This baby was born 3 days ago here on Boone land. His uncle delivered him. By all the laws of God and man, he belongs here." She looked at Caleb then, and in her eyes was a question and a plea. He understood. She was giving him a choice: claim them or let them go. Speak or stay silent. Be the uncle and protector Eli had believed he could be, or remain the hermit hiding from his past. Caleb looked at the graves of his family, at the empty grave of his brother, who hadn't been lost after all, just delayed by death, at Rosa, who'd walked through hell to honor a dying man's wish, at the baby who carried forward names that deserved to live. For 5 years, words had been ashes in his throat. But now, standing between the dead he'd failed and the living he could still save, Caleb felt something shift inside him. Not healing, that would take longer, but a crack in the wall he'd built around his voice. He couldn't speak, not yet. But he could act. Caleb walked to Rosa's side, placed his hand on her shoulder, then pointed to himself, to her, to the baby, and finally to the cabin. The message was clear. They stay. They're mine. Family. "You're making a mistake," Valdez said coldly. "I'll be back with more men, with a real judge. This isn't over." But his bravado rang hollow. Even he could feel it, the weight of the place, the rightness of Rosa's words. This was Boone land, and she carried a Boone child. Some claims went deeper than paper. As they mounted up to leave, one of Valdez's men muttered, "Bad luck, disturbing family graves. Bad luck taking a baby from his blood." They rode away, but everyone knew they'd be back. The question was whether words and laws would be enough when they did. If this story is whispering something inside you, pause and comment. The past never dies in silence. Then subscribe. Stories like this ride with you long after they end. That evening, nature itself seemed to respond to the day's tensions. Storm clouds gathered over the mountains, rolling in with unnatural speed. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in an hour, and the wind howled like grieving women. Rosa sat by the fire, nursing little Eli, while Caleb secured the cabin for the storm. As he worked, she talked, filling the silence he couldn't yet break. "Eli told me about that night," she said softly. "The fire. How you went back 3 times trying to get to them. How your hands—" She looked at his scarred palms. "How you dug through burning wood until the neighbors pulled you away." Caleb's movement stilled. No one had ever spoken of that night to him. The town had collectively agreed to let it lie, to let him grieve in silence. "He said you were supposed to go with him on the cattle drive, but your pa needed you here for the spring branding. Eli felt guilty about leaving, but you told him to go to see the world while he could." Rosa shifted the baby to her other side. "He said you always put family first, always." Thunder cracked overhead, and the first drops of rain began to fall. But inside the cabin, another storm was building. The one Caleb had kept at bay for 5 years. "When we met," Rosa continued, "Eli was half dead with guilt and whiskey. I cleaned him up, listened to his stories. He talked about you like you were some kind of legend. His big brother, who could tame any horse, fix any problem, weather any storm." Lightning illuminated the cabin, throwing stark shadows. In that brief, white moment, Caleb saw his brother in the baby's face. The same nose, the same determined chin. He was coming back to help you rebuild, had it all planned out. We'd live in the old foreman's cottage until the main house was done. He'd handle the cattle, you'd handle the horses. I'd keep house and raise babies. He wanted lots of babies. Her voice broke. He drew me pictures of how it would be. The 2 of us, you, children running everywhere. A family again. The storm reached its full fury, rain hammering the roof like bullets, and inside Caleb, another dam broke. Tears he'd held for 5 years finally fell, silent as everything else about him, but no less real for their quietness. Rosa saw them, understood them. "It's not your fault," she said firmly. "Not the fire, not Eli's death, none of it. You couldn't save everyone. But Caleb, you saved us. Me and little Eli. You gave us what big Eli wanted most, a place to belong." The baby fussed, disturbed by the storm. Without thinking, Caleb reached for him. Rosa handed him over, and Caleb held his nephew for the first time since delivering him. The weight was nothing. The responsibility was everything. Little Eli settled immediately, somehow comforted by his uncle's solid presence. And in that moment, with the storm raging outside and this small life trusting him completely, Caleb felt something fundamental shift. He opened his mouth. For 5 years, no sound had emerged, but now holding his brother's son, sitting with the woman his brother had loved, surrounded by the ghosts of what was and the promise of what could be, Caleb forced out a single word. "Stay." It came out rough, barely a whisper, like the first water through a long dry creek, but it was there, a word, a beginning. Rosa's eyes widened, filled with tears. She understood the magnitude of what had just happened. "Yes," she whispered back. "Yes, we'll stay." The word broke something loose in Caleb. Not a flood, he wasn't ready for that, but a trickle that promised more. Over the following days, more words came, each one fought for, each one precious. Thank you when Rosa cooked meals from his meager supplies. Hungry when the baby cried. Beautiful when he watched the sunrise with little Eli in his arms. Rosa never pushed, never demanded more than he could give. She understood that 5 years of silence couldn't be undone in days, but she encouraged each word with smiles and patience, creating space for his voice to remember itself. A week after Valdez's visit, they were sitting on the porch in the evening cool, the baby sleeping between them in a makeshift cradle Caleb had built. The sunset painted the desert in shades of gold and memory. "Tell me," Rosa said gently. "About them, about your family." Caleb was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, haltingly, like a man learning a new language, he began, "Pa built this place. Nothing to everything. Ma, Irish, sang constantly. Sarah, 12. Horse crazy, Tommy, 8, wanted to be me." Each word cost him, but Rosa's quiet attention made it easier. She didn't interrupt, didn't ask for more, just listened as he painted his family in broken phrases. "Eli?" she asked softly when he paused. "Wild one, dreamer, good heart." Caleb's voice cracked. "Should have gone with him." "No," Rosa said firmly. "Then you would have died too, and who would have saved us? Who would have been here to receive your brother's family?" They sat in companionable silence as stars began to appear. Then Rosa asked the question that had been building since she arrived. "What will you do about Valdez? He'll come back." Caleb looked at little Eli sleeping peacefully, unaware of the threats surrounding his small life. Then he looked at Rosa, strong, brave Rosa who'd honored his brother's dying wish. "Fight," he said simply, "legal-like first, gun-like if needed." "I have some money," Rosa offered. "Eli's wages from the drive, hidden it from Valdez. Maybe enough for a lawyer? Maybe." Caleb was thinking now, planning. 5 years of isolation had left him disconnected from the town, but there were still those who remembered the Boones fondly. Judge Carter, fair man, new Pa. Will he help? Try. It was the longest conversation Caleb had managed, and exhaustion showed in his face. But there was something else there too. Determination. Purpose. The baby stirred, making small sounds of hunger. Rosa lifted him to nurse, and Caleb watched this simple domestic scene with wonder. Family. After all this time, he had family again. "Caleb," Rosa said softly, "there's something else about Eli, something he wanted me to tell you, but I wasn't sure when." He waited, patient now with words and their timing. He found them, the men who set the fire, tracked them down in Mexico. Caleb went very still. "They're dead," Rosa continued. "All three. Eli made sure. Said he couldn't come home until justice was done. Said you deserve to know your family's death was paid for." The words hit Caleb like physical blows. His little brother, barely 19 when he left, had hunted down their family's killers, had carried that weight so Caleb wouldn't have to. "That's why he was so long coming back," Rosa finished. "Not because he forgot, because he remembered too well." Caleb stood abruptly, walked to the edge of the porch. The desert stretched endlessly before him, but for the first time in 5 years it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like possibility. "Thank you," he said roughly, "for telling me, for coming, for everything." "We're family now," Rosa said, simply. That's what family does. The next morning, Caleb did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He rode into Dry Hollow with a purpose beyond supplies. Rosa stayed at the cabin with the baby, armed with his extra rifle and instructions, to bar the door if strangers came. The town looked different somehow, smaller, less intimidating. Or maybe it was Caleb who had changed, who no longer needed the armor of absolute silence. His first stop was the general store. Old Pete Hawkins nearly dropped his inventory ledger when Caleb walked in and actually spoke. "Need ammunition and paper, legal paper." "Caleb, you're talking." Pete's shock was comical. "Some. Business?" Pete recovered quickly, a grin spreading across his weathered face. "Business? Yes, sir. Whatever you need." As Pete gathered the requested items, word spread through Dry Hollow like wildfire. Caleb Boone was talking. Something momentous must have happened. Next stop, Judge Carter's office. The judge was older now, silver-haired and dignified, but his eyes were still sharp. He remembered the Boones, remembered the fire, remembered the boy who'd gone silent from grief. "Caleb," he said warmly. "Sit. Tell me what brings you here." Haltingly, with frequent pauses, Caleb explained. Rosa, the baby, Eli's death, Valdez's claim. As he spoke, the judge's expression grew increasingly grave. "Marcus Valdez," Carter mused. "Yes, I know of him. Rich, powerful, used to getting his way. This judge in San Antonio who signed his papers, Rodriguez, was it? Bought and paid for, I'm afraid." "Help?" Caleb asked. "I can file counterpapers, establish the baby's parentage, your guardianship as blood uncle." "But Caleb..." The judge leaned forward. "Valdez won't give up easily. He's not used to losing. Neither am I." Something in Caleb's tone made the judge reassess him. This wasn't the broken boy who'd disappeared into silence 5 years ago. This was a man who'd found something worth fighting for. "All right," Carter decided. "Bring Rosa to town tomorrow. We'll need her testimony, witnesses to the birth. Doc, Holman should examine the baby, establish probable paternity. We'll build a case that no honest court could overturn." "And dishonest courts?" "Well," the judge smiled grimly, "that's why God made Colt revolvers, isn't it?" Caleb's final stop was one he'd avoided for 5 years, the church. Not for God, though maybe that too, but for Reverend Hutchins. The man who'd called Rosa a harlot needed to understand some things. The Reverend was in his office preparing Sunday's sermon on the wages of sin. He looked up when Caleb entered, and his face went pale. "Mr. Boone, I heard you were speaking again." "Some." Caleb stood over the desk, using his height to advantage. "The woman, Rosa, you called her harlot. That is, she appeared to be my brother's widow, my nephew's mother, family." Each word was carefully placed like stones in a wall. "Sunday, you'll apologize, publicly." "Now see here." Caleb leaned forward. "Apologize, or I tell everyone about Katie Hutchins, your sister, the one who got pregnant at 15, the one you sent away." The Reverend's face went from pale to red. "How do you..." "Pa helped, gave money, kept quiet." Caleb straightened. "I kept quiet too, until now." The threat was clear. The Reverend's reputation, built on condemning others' sins, wouldn't survive his own hypocrisy being revealed. "Guys, I'll consider your request," Hutchins stammered. "Good." Caleb turned to leave, then paused. Judge not, right? Lest ye be judged. He left the reverend sputtering and headed home. 3 stops, 3 small victories. It wasn't enough to win the war, but it was a beginning. By Sunday, all of Dry Hollow knew the story, or versions of it, each telling adding new details like a game of telegraph. The silent cowboy had a nephew. The Mexican woman was actually a widow. There was going to be a legal fight with a rich rancher from San Antonio. The town divided predictably. Those who'd known and respected the Boones sided with Caleb. Those who feared change or coveted Valdez's potential business interests muttered about outsiders and impropriety. But Sunday's church service tipped the balance. Rosa had been reluctant to go, remembering her last reception in town. But Caleb insisted, and she trusted him. They entered together, Rosa in a clean dress Caleb had bought from the general store, the baby in a new blanket. Caleb wore his father's Sunday suit, pulled from a trunk he hadn't opened in 5 years. The congregation fell silent as they entered. Then old Mrs. Jameson, who'd been Margaret Boone's best friend, stood up. "Rosa, honey, you come sit with me. That baby needs a grandmother's arms while you rest." One by one, others made space, offered welcoming nods. Not everyone. Some still glared with judgment, but enough. Enough to make Rosa's eyes fill with grateful tears. Reverend Hutchins took the pulpit, clearly uncomfortable. He began his prepared sermon on sin and judgment, but kept glancing at Caleb. Finally, halfway through, he stopped. I need to say something," he began. "Last week, a woman came to our town in need, and I failed her. Failed my calling. Failed Christ's commandment to love our neighbors." The congregation stirred, shocked by this departure from script. I called her names, judged her without knowledge, and in doing so, I became the very Pharisee our Lord condemned. He looked directly at Rosa. "Mrs. Martinez, I apologize. You came seeking sanctuary and found only stones. That's on me, not you." Rosa nodded graciously, though Caleb could see her hands trembling. The Reverend continued. "This woman, I've learned, is the widow of Eli Boone, a good man from a good family. She came here honoring his dying wish to find his brother. She deserves our support, not our scorn." After the service, the change was palpable. Women who'd walked past Rosa before now stopped to admire the baby. Men who'd ignored Caleb's existence for 5 years offered handshakes and support. "If you need rifles when Valdez comes, you let us know," Tom Baker said quietly. He'd lost his own son to fever 3 years back and understood about protecting what family remained. "My husband's a lawyer in Austin," Mrs. Patterson offered. "He's honest, I could write to him." By the time they left, Caleb had a dozen offers of help. The town that had let Rosa fall in the dust was ready to fight for her now. Sometimes it just took one person standing up to change the direction of the wind. But as they rode home, Caleb noticed the dust cloud on the southern horizon. Riders, moving fast. Valdez wasn't waiting for legal proceedings. "Go," he told Rosa, handing her the reins to his wagon. "Take the baby, go to town to Mrs. Jameson, safe there. What about you?" "Time to end this." Rosa saw the resolution in his eyes. "Be careful. Little Eli needs his uncle." "He'll have him," Caleb promised, "one way or another." As Rosa raced toward town, Caleb turned to face whatever came. He had words now and purpose and family to protect. Sometimes that was enough, sometimes it had to be. Valdez had brought 8 men this time. They spread out as they approached, cutting off escape routes. Caleb stood on his porch, rifle in hand, but not yet raised, watching them come. "You've caused me considerable trouble, Hermit," Valdez called out. "Cost me time and money. That ends today." "Legal papers coming," Caleb said, his voice stronger now with use. "Judge Carter, official custody. Provincial nonsense. I have friends in Austin, in Washington. Your small-town judge means nothing." Valdez dismounted, supremely confident. "But I'm reasonable. I'll make you a deal." Caleb waited. "The woman can go. I don't really want her. Anyway, spoiled goods. But the baby comes with me. I need an heir, and Mexican bastard or not, he'll do." "No." "No?" Valdez laughed. "You're outnumbered 8-1. What exactly do you think?" He was interrupted by the sound of horses. Many horses, coming from the direction of town. Over the rise came riders, Tom Baker, Pete Hawkins, Doc Holman, even Reverend Hutchins, looking uncomfortable on horseback, but determined. 20 men in all, armed and ready. "Heard you might have trouble," Tom Baker said conversationally. "Thought we'd even the odds." Valdez's confidence evaporated. "This is none of your business." "Boons are our business," old Pete corrected. "Always have been. Good family, good neighbors. We failed them once, during the fire. Won't fail them again. Besides," Doc Holman added, "I delivered that baby. Well, Caleb did, but I examined him after. Strong resemblance to Eli Boone. Spitting image, actually. Be happy to testify to that in court." Valdez looked around at the stern faces, the ready weapons. His own men were shifting nervously, no longer liking the odds. "This isn't over," he snarled. "I'll be back with real law, federal marshals." "Try it," Judge Carter said, riding up with the last group. "I've already wired Austin. Turns out you're wanted there for some interesting financial irregularities. Something about missing cattle and forged bills of sale?" Valdez went pale. His empire, built on intimidation and corruption, was crumbling. "You have 1 hour to clear out of the county," the judge continued. "After that, well, frontier justice has a way of handling men who threaten widows and babies." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Valdez's shoulders slumped. He'd lost, and he knew it. Without another word, he mounted and rode away, his men following like whipped dogs. The townsmen stayed until the dust settled, making sure the threat was truly gone. Then, one by one, they came to shake Caleb's hand. "Thank you," Caleb said to each one. The words came easier now. "No," Tom Baker said firmly. "Thank you for reminding us what neighbors are for." After they left, Caleb stood alone on his porch, looking out at the land his father had built, where his brother lay buried, where his family's legacy would continue. The silence that had protected him for 5 years was broken, but he didn't mourn its loss. Some things were worth more than safety. A year passed. The cabin expanded, room by room, as Caleb rebuilt not just walls, but a life. Rosa had become essential, not just as his nephew's mother, but as a partner in resurrection. Together they were raising Eli Jr. to know his heritage, to understand the names he carried. The boy was walking now, toddling between them with determination that reminded Caleb painfully and beautifully of his brother. His first word had been "Papa," directed at Caleb, and Rosa hadn't corrected him. Some truths were deeper than blood. "Letter from Austin," Rosa announced one morning, returning from town with supplies. "From Mrs. Patterson's husband." Caleb read it, his literacy another thing recovered from the ashes of silence. Valdez had fled to Mexico, his properties seized, for fraud. There would be no more threats from that quarter. "Safe now," he told Rosa. "We were always safe," she corrected, "from the moment you decided we were family." They were standing by Eli's grave, where they came every Sunday to tell him about his son's growth. The empty grave had been filled with some of Eli's belongings Rosa had saved. His spurs, a belt buckle, a letter he'd written but never sent. "Thinking of adding onto the house again," Caleb said. "Another bedroom, maybe 2. Rosa looked at him sharply. "Planning on more orphans?" "Maybe. Or..." He struggled with words that had nothing to do with his years of silence and everything to do with the heart. "Rosa, this year, you and little Eli, best year since the fire." She waited, patient as always. "Marry me." The words came out, rushed, nervous. "Not for propriety, not for the baby, for us, because I..." "Yes," Rosa interrupted, laughing through tears. "Yes, Caleb Boone, I'll marry you. Eli would be so happy." They were married a month later, with half the town in attendance. Little Eli served as ring-bearer, toddling down the aisle with serious concentration. Reverend Hutchins performed the ceremony with genuine joy, having learned his own lessons about judgment and redemption. As they exchanged vows, Caleb spoke, clearly, strongly. The words came easier now, though he'd never be chatty. Some silences were choice now, not compulsion. "Do you, Caleb, take Rosa to be your wife?" Hutchins asked. "I do, for all my days, through words and silence both." It wasn't traditional, but nothing about their story was. A pregnant stranger, a silent cowboy, a baby who bridged the gap between past and future, a name carried forward when all seemed lost. That night, as Rosa tucked little Eli into his new bed in his new room, she sang the lullabies her mother had taught her, mixed with the Irish songs Caleb remembered from his mother. The boy fell asleep to this mixture of heritages, secure in the knowledge that he was loved, wanted, chosen. Eli would be proud, Rosa whispered, joining Caleb on the porch. Both of them, Caleb agreed, meaning his brother and his father. All of them, he amended, thinking of his mother and siblings too. The desert stretched before them, no longer empty, but full of promise. Somewhere out there, Eli's grave lay marked and honored. Here, his son grew strong and loved. And in between, two people who'd found each other through grief were building something new from the ashes of what was lost. 5 years later, the Boone Ranch was thriving. Caleb had reclaimed his father's legacy, building the herds, breeding the horses that had made the Boone name respected. But more than that, he'd built a family. Little Eli, now 6, rode like he, was born to the saddle. He had his father's adventurous spirit tempered by his uncle's steady presence. His sister, Maria, 4, had Rosa's dark eyes and Caleb's quiet strength. Baby William, named for both grandfathers, was just taking his first steps. "Uncle Papa," Eli called out. He'd never quite sorted out what to call Caleb, so he used both. "Look, I can rope the fence post." Caleb watched with pride as the boy demonstrated what he'd been practicing. Good form, like your pa. They still talked about Big Eli regularly, keeping his memory alive. Rosa had created a photo album with the pictures she'd saved, stories written down so they wouldn't be forgotten. Little Eli knew his father had been a hero who'd died protecting his mother, who'd avenged his grandparents, who'd sent his family to the only person he trusted to keep them safe. "Company coming?" Rosa observed, shading her eyes against the sun. A lone rider approached, moving slow, unthreatening. As he got closer, Caleb recognized him, Miguel Santos, who'd ridden with Eli on that fatal drive. "Senor Caleb," Miguel said, dismounting, "I'm sorry to come unannounced, but I have something for you, for the boy." He pulled out a small leather bag. "Eli's share from the drive, we all thought he'd spent it, but I found this in his things. He was saving it. For the family," he said. Inside was more money than Caleb had seen in years. Enough to expand the ranch, to secure the children's future, to build the dynasty William Boone had dreamed of. "There's a letter too," Miguel added. Caleb recognized Eli's scrawled handwriting. "Brother, if you're reading this, something's happened to me. I'm leaving this with Miguel because I trust him. Use it to rebuild what we lost. I'm sorry I wasn't there for the fire. Sorry I left you alone with the grief. But I'm coming home now, and I'm bringing you a sister and a nephew. Take care of them for me. They're the best of me. Your brother, Eli P.S. Start talking again, you stubborn mule." The silence doesn't bring them back. Even from beyond the grave, Eli was looking out for them, still trying to make things right. That night, after the children were asleep, Caleb and Rosa sat on the porch where so many important moments had happened. "He knew," Rosa said softly. "Somehow he knew something might happen." "Boone men," Caleb said. "We prepare for the worst, hope for the best. And the women who love them are the bravest souls in creation." They sat in comfortable silence, the kind chosen, not imposed. In the distance, a coyote called and another answered. The desert was alive with small sounds, no longer the empty vastness Caleb had once used as a shield. "I want to do something," Caleb said eventually, "with Eli's money, something he'd approve of." "What did you have in mind?" "A school, here in Dry Hollow, for all children, Mexican, Anglo, Indian, everyone." He gestured toward the house where their children slept. "They'll need education, real education, and others too." Rosa smiled. The Eli Boone School. He'd love that. Education for everyone, no matter where they came from. Words for the silent, Caleb added. Voices for those who've lost them. 10 years after that first meeting by the water trough, Dry Hollow had transformed. The Eli Boone School stood proud on Main Street, educating children whose parents could never have afforded tutors. Rosa ran it with help from 2 teachers brought from Austin, creating a place where all were welcome. Caleb, now a man of selective but meaningful words, served as sheriff. The badge had weight not just of law but of redemption. The silent cowboy had become the voice of justice, speaking for those who couldn't speak for themselves. Their family had grown too. Besides Eli, Maria, and William, there were twins, Margaret and Sarah, named for the grandmothers they'd never meet. The ranch house had expanded to accommodate them all, built on the original foundation but reaching higher, wider, full of life where death had once reigned. On this particular day, they were hosting a celebration. Little Eli, though not so little anymore at 16, had been accepted to college back east. He would study law, become the voice for justice his father never got to be. "Scared?" Caleb asked, finding his nephew's son on the porch. "Some," Eli admitted. "It's far. Different. Your father went far, found your mother, brought her home." Caleb put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You'll go far. Find your purpose. Come home stronger." "What if I can't find words like you did? What if I'm silent out there?" Caleb smiled. "Then you'll learn what I did. Silence is just waiting for the right words, and the right words come when someone needs to hear them." The party swirled around. They that me's townspeople who'd become family, family who'd become community. Rosa directed everything with her usual grace. Children ran laughing through the crowd, and somewhere, Caleb was certain, ghosts smiled at what had grown from ashes. "Tell me again," Eli requested as he had since childhood, "about the day Mom came to town." So Caleb told it, words flowing easier now but still precious. How a pregnant stranger had collapsed by the trough. How he'd carried her home without knowing she carried his brother's child, his family's future. How silence had broken under the weight of love and necessity. "She didn't speak when she arrived," Caleb concluded, as always. "But neither did I. We found our voices together, found our family in the finding." "The past never dies in silence," Eli quoted, the phrase that had become family motto. "No," Caleb agreed. "It lives in the voices we raise, the children we save, the love we choose despite the loss." As sunset approached, they gathered at the family cemetery. The empty grave was no longer empty. Miguel had helped them find Eli's real grave, and they'd brought him home. He lay beside his parents and siblings now, the family complete, if not in life, then in death. Rosa placed flowers, roses she'd learned, to grow despite the desert, beauty insisting on itself. The children, even the young ones, stood quietly, understanding this was sacred ground. "Thank you," Rosa said as she did every visit, "for sending me to him, for trusting him with us." The wind whispered through the mesquite, and for a moment Caleb could swear he heard voices, his mother's Irish lilt, his father's steady bass, his siblings' laughter, Eli's wild whoop. All the silenced voices living on in the wind, in the words of their descendants. The morning of Eli's departure for college brought an unexpected visitor. A woman, elderly but straight-backed, rode up in a fine carriage with armed outriders. Her clothes spoke of wealth, but her eyes held something deeper, recognition, perhaps, or old pain, finally ready for release. "I'm looking for Caleb Boone," she announced. "I'm Boone," Caleb said, stepping forward. She studied him with eyes that seemed to see through time. "You have your mother's chin, your father's stance, but your eyes, those are all your own, carved by grief, strengthened by love." "Do I know you, ma'am?" "No, but I knew your parents. My name is Eleanor Whitfield. 20 years ago, I was Eleanor Valdez." The name hit like cold water. Rosa's hand found Caleb's, steadying. "Marcus was my son," Eleanor continued, "my only child. He died in Mexico 5 years ago. Bar fight, they said, though I suspect someone's justice finally found him." She paused. "I've come to make amends." "No need," Caleb said shortly. "Past is past." "Is it? When the future still bears its scars?" She gestured to young Eli. "This young man would have been my grandson, if Marcus had his way. Raised in wealth but not love, shaped by ambition rather than character. She descended from the carriage with help from her driver, approaching Rosa. You saved him from that fate. Saved him from becoming what Marcus became, a man who saw people as possessions. From the carriage, she produced a leather portfolio. I've spent 5 years undoing what my son did, making restitution where possible. This is the last of it. Inside were deeds, bank drafts, legal documents. The Valdez Ranch in San Antonio. It's yours now, all of it, and funds to run it properly. We don't want, Rosa began. It's not about want, it's about justice, about turning ill-gotten gains to good purpose. Eleanor looked at young Eli. You're going to study law? Good. The world needs lawyers who understand justice comes from more than books. She turned back to Caleb. Your parents lent my husband money once when we were starting out. Charged no interest, asked no questions, simply helped because we needed it. William Boone was the finest man I knew. I'm sorry, my son. Your son made choices, Caleb said, finding words for forgiveness he didn't know he had. You're making different ones. That matters. Eleanor's composure finally cracked. Thank you for that grace, for raising the boy Marcus would have corrupted, for being the man your parents raised you to be. Before leaving, she asked to see the cemetery. They walked there together, this strange group bound by history's tangles. At Eli's grave, Eleanor placed a single flower. Your brother tracked down the men who killed your family, she said quietly. Did you know that? Yes. One of them was my husband's cousin. That's how the fire started. A business deal gone wrong, your father refusing to participate in their schemes. She touched the gravestone. Such a web we weave with our choices. Your brother gave his life untangling it. He gave his life for love, Rosa corrected gently. The rest was just clearing the path. They left Eleanor at the graves to make her private peace. As her carriage pulled away, young Eli asked, Will we take it, the ranch? Caleb looked at Rosa, who nodded. We'll take it. Make it another school, another place where silence finds voice. The Boone Valdez Academy? Eli suggested with a slight smile. Just the academy, Caleb decided. Names matter less than purposes. 4 years passed. Young Eli thrived at Harvard. His letters home full of knowledge and questions. He wrote of law and justice, of professors who challenged, and classmates who couldn't understand his frontier background. Uncle Papa, one letter read, They don't comprehend. Silence here, everything is words, arguments, debates. But I remember what you taught. Sometimes the most important truths live in the spaces between words. I'm learning their language, but I won't forget ours. The ranch prospered. With the Valdez resources, they'd built the academy in San Antonio, as planned, with Rosa traveling between the two schools. Maria showed her father's gift with horses, while William had his grandfather's head for business. The twins were bundles of energy, keeping everyone busy. Caleb had grown comfortable with words, but still used them sparingly. Some habits, once formed for survival, became choices for living. The townspeople respected it, knowing that when Sheriff Boone spoke, it mattered. On a spring day like any other, a telegram arrived that changed everything. Graduated with honors. Stop coming home. Stop bringing someone. Stop. Eli. Someone? Rosa puzzled. A friend? They got their answer a week later, when the stage brought Eli home. He emerged tall and confident, his father's swagger tempered by his uncle's steadiness. Behind him a young woman descended, Chinese, beautifully dressed, carrying herself with nervous dignity. Uncle Papa, Mama Rosa, Eli said formally. I'd like you to meet Mei-Lin Chen, my fiancée. The silence that followed wasn't Caleb's chosen kind, but the shocked variety. Then Rosa, ever gracious, stepped forward. Welcome, Mei-Lin. Any family of Eli's is family of ours. Later, in private, Eli explained. Her father owns a restaurant in Boston. I ate there to save money, and we got to talking. She's brilliant, speaks 4 languages, wants to be a teacher. But her family came here fleeing violence, and some people, he trailed off. Some people judge what they don't understand, Caleb finished. Like they judged your mother. Exactly. I knew you'd understand. Your father, Rosa said softly. Would have loved her. He always did like surprising people. The wedding was held at the ranch, a mixture of traditions that would have scandalized proper society but felt perfectly right for the Boone family. Maylin's parents, initially skeptical, were won over by Rosa's warmth and Caleb's quiet acceptance. In this family, Caleb told them in careful English, we judge by character, not category. Your daughter has character. During the reception, young Eli, now attorney Eli Boone, took Caleb aside. I have an offer from a firm in Austin, but also one from the territorial government, prosecutor, handling cases others won't touch, protection, for people who can't protect themselves. Which calls to you? You know which one, but it's dangerous. Maylin understands, supports it, but with children coming. Caleb looked across the celebration at his own children, at Rosa organizing. Everything with quiet efficiency, at the life built from ashes and choices. Dangerous to stand for something, more dangerous to stand for nothing. He paused. Your father faced bandits for love. You'll face different bandits. Same courage required. Eli nodded. Decision made. The territorial job then. Fighting for those who can't speak for themselves. Like uncle, like nephew. Like father, like son, Eli corrected. All my fathers. 10 more years. And the Boone legacy had spread across Texas like seeds on favorable wind. The schools had multiplied. The academy model copied in 3 other towns. Eli had made a name as a prosecutor who couldn't be bought, bringing justice to those who thought themselves untouchable. Caleb, now silver-haired but still strong, stood watching his grandchildren play in the yard. Eli and Maylin's 3, William, called Billy, Rose, and baby Samuel. His and Rosa's younger children were nearly grown now, Maria preparing for her own wedding, William heading east for university. Gathering wool? Rosa asked, joining him on the porch. Counting blessings. She leaned against him, still beautiful in his eyes. Remember the day we met? Silent cowboy, pregnant stranger, baby carrying my name. Best day of my life, though I didn't know it then. Mine too, though it took me a while to find words for it. They watched Billy, now 6, trying to rope, a fence post like his father had at that age. The boy had Eli Sr.'s wild spirit, Maylin's quick mind, and something all his own, a gift for bringing people together. Letter from Austin, Maria called out, bringing the mail. From Eli. Caleb read it aloud, his voice steady with years of practice. Family, big news. Governor's appointing me to the new Commission for Indian Affairs. Wants someone who understands about being judged for blood rather than character. Maylin's already planning how her teaching can help. We're moving to the capital permanently. Also, Billy's been asking about his name. Told him about his grandfather, the first Eli. He wants to visit the grave, hear the stories from you. Can we come next month? Your son, Eli. He always knows when to come, Rosa observed. Always senses when we need family close. That night, Caleb walked alone to the cemetery. The graves were well tended, surrounded by roses that bloomed impossibly in the desert. He stood at Eli's stone, thinking about cycles and circles, about how love persisted across generations. Your boy's doing good, he said quietly. Making the difference you wanted to make. Fighting with law instead of guns, but fighting nonetheless. The wind stirred, carrying the scent of roses and rain. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called, not mournful but welcoming, like family greeting family. He thought about silence then, about the 5 years he'd spent wordless, wrapped in grief. It had saved him, that silence, given him space to heal. But breaking it had saved him too, opened doors to love he'd thought forever closed. Thank you, he said to the graves, for sending her, for trusting me, for all of it. Walking back, he found Rosa teaching the twins to dance, some Mexican tune mixed with Irish steps. Their laughter rang across the valley, reaching even to the stars beginning to emerge. This was what survived. Not the pain, but the love. Not the silence, but the words finally found. Not the blood alone, but the choices that made strangers into family. The reunion brought all the scattered Boones home. Eli and his family from Austin, Maria from her new ranch with her husband, William from his studies. Even Miguel Santos came, old now but still spry, full of stories about the first Eli. They gathered at the cemetery, as tradition demanded, 3 generations paying respects to those who'd paved their way. Billy stood very straight as Caleb told him about his namesake, the wild young man who'd left to see the world and died protecting what he loved. Was he brave? Billy asked. Very brave, and kind, and sometimes foolish, but always, always loyal. To family. Like you, Grandpa? Caleb considered. I try, we all try, that's what makes us Boones. Later, as the family feast wound down, Eli stood to make an announcement. Maylin and I have news we're expecting again, and if it's a boy, he looked at Caleb. We'd like to name him Caleb, for the man who showed us that silence can be strength, but speaking up for others is stronger. Caleb felt words desert him, but this time from emotion, not trauma. Rosa squeezed his hand, her own eyes bright with tears. Be honored, he managed finally, deeply honored. Tell him the story, Grandpa, Rose piped up, about finding Grandma, Rosa. So Caleb told it again, the story that had become family legend, but this time with all of them gathered he added details he'd kept private. How terror had gripped him seeing Eli's photograph, how the first word, stay, had felt like swallowing glass, how saving Rosa and baby Eli had really been about saving himself. I was dead inside, he said simply. Your grandmother brought me back to life. Your father gave me purpose. Together they gave me family. And now look, Rosa added, gesturing to the assembled crowd. From silence and sorrow, all this grew, like roses in the desert. As night fell, they moved to the porch, children playing in the yard, adults sharing quiet conversation. Maylin taught the twins Chinese words, while Maria showed Billy rope tricks. William and young Eli debated law and justice with the passion of youth tempered by wisdom. Caleb sat in his chair, watching it all, Rosa beside him. The silence between them was comfortable, chosen, full of shared understanding. Any regrets? Rosa asked softly. None that matter, you? Only that Eli, both Elis, couldn't see this, their legacy, thriving. They see, Caleb said with certainty. Somehow they see. 25 years after Rosa had collapsed by the water trough, Dry Hollow hosted a special celebration. The Eli Boone School was expanding again, adding a library and medical clinic. The whole town turned out, including many who'd been children when it first opened. Caleb, now in his 70s but still straight-backed, stood to dedicate the new buildings. His voice, once locked away for 5 years, now rang clear across the crowd. My brother Eli believed in education, believed everyone deserved a chance, to learn, to grow, to find their voice. Today we honor that belief. He paused, looking at Rosa, still beautiful to him at 65, at their children and grandchildren filling the front rows, at the townspeople who'd become extended family. 25 years ago, a pregnant stranger came to our town. I was silent then, wrapped in old grief. She was silent too, exhausted, from running. But together we found words, found family, found purpose. He gestured to the building. This school stands because silence was broken, because a woman honored a dying man's wish, because a town chose compassion over judgment, because love is stronger than loss. Young Billy, now a strapping young man studying law like his father, helped unveil the cornerstone. Carved into it were words that had become the school's motto. From silence, voices. From sorrow, joy. From strangers, family. After the ceremony, an old woman approached Caleb. He didn't recognize her at first. Time had been harsh, but then she smiled. Mr. Boone, you won't remember me. I'm Catherine Hutchins. Reverend Hutchins was my father. Caleb tensed slightly. The Reverend had died years ago, but the memory of his harsh judgment still stung. I wanted to thank you, Catherine continued, for keeping my secret all those years, for giving my father a chance to become better. After he apologized to Mrs. Rosa, he was different, kinder. He helped several other women in similar situations, quietly, without judgment. People change, Caleb said simply. given chance and reason. Yes, and sometimes they need someone strong enough to demand that change. She pressed something into his hand, a small leather journal. Father's diary, the entry about that Sunday, about your courage in confronting him. He called you an instrument of God's correction, thought you should know. After she left, Caleb stood holding the journal, thinking about ripples and consequences, about how one act of kindness, taking in a stranger, had spread outward in ways he never could have imagined. Ready to go home? Rosa asked, appearing at his elbow. This is home, Caleb said, gesturing to the town, the school, the people. All of it. Yes, she agreed, but I meant the ranch. Maylin's making her special dumplings for dinner. They walked to their wagon, still steady on their feet, still partners after all these years. As they drove out of town, they passed the water trough where it all began. Someone had placed a plaque there. On this spot, October 1882, compassion triumphed over indifference. Seems a bit much, Caleb commented. Seems exactly right, Rosa countered. One man's kindness changed hundreds of lives. That deserves remembering. 5 years later, Caleb knew his time was growing short. His body, which had survived grief and gunfights, was finally wearing down. But his mind remained clear, his purpose unbent. He spent his days teaching the newest grandchildren to ride, passing on the knowledge his father had given him. Evenings found him on the porch with Rosa, watching sunsets that seemed more beautiful for being numbered. I want to write something, he told Rosa one evening, for them to understand. She brought him paper and pen, then sat beside him as he worked. His handwriting, once frozen like his voice, now flowed with hard-won wisdom. To my family, blood and chosen, they say I was silent for 5 years. That's not true. I was screaming inside, just couldn't make the sounds come out. The fire took my voice, along with my family, locked it away where I thought it would be safe from more hurt. Then Rosa came, carrying my brother's child and his last wish. She didn't need my words at first. She needed my hands to help, my strength to protect, my choice to stand between her and harm. In saving her, she saved me. I learned that silence can be a shield, but it can also be a prison. That words can hurt, but not speaking hurts worse. That family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up, who stays, who chooses love over fear. Young Eli, you carry names of men who died too soon, but loved too well to be forgotten. Honor them by living fully, speaking truthfully, protecting fiercely. To all my grandchildren, your heritage is complicated. Boones and Martinez's, Chens and others, all woven together by choice and chance. Be proud of that weaving. In a world that wants to divide, be those who unite. Rosa, my love, my life, you know my heart better than words could say. Thank you for waiting while I found my voice. Thank you for filling our home with the sounds I'd forgotten. Laughter, song, children playing. Thank you for showing me that the past never dies in silence, but it can live transformed in love. When I'm gone, remember this. I was a silent cowboy who welcomed a pregnant stranger. She was carrying more than a child. She was carrying redemption, purpose, future. Together, we built something from ashes. Keep building. Keep welcoming strangers. Keep breaking silences that need breaking. Keep choosing love over fear, words over silence, family over solitude. The water trough still stands in town. People still fall there, needing help. Be the ones who stop. Be the ones who lift. Be the ones who carry them home. With all my love and all my words, finally freed, Caleb Boone. He sealed the letter, placed it with the family papers. Then he and Rosa sat in their customary silence, but it was full of memory, of accomplishment, of love that needed no words, because it had already said everything. No regrets, Rosa said. It wasn't a question. None, Caleb confirmed. Full life, good life, grateful life. They watched the sun set over the desert that had been sanctuary and home, where roses bloomed impossibly and families formed from fragments, where silence had been broken by a baby's cry and a man's first word in 5 years. Stay. They had stayed, They had built. They had loved. It was enough. It was everything. Caleb Boone died as he'd lived his best years, surrounded by family, his voice clear until the end. His last words were for Rosa, "Thank you for bringing me home." The funeral drew hundreds. Students from the schools, families helped by the academy, fellow lawmen who'd learned from his example. But it was Billy who gave the eulogy that captured the man. "My grandfather was silent for 5 years, not because he had nothing to say, but because he had too much, grief and guilt and love all tangled together, choking off words. Then my grandmother arrived, pregnant and desperate, carrying my father, and a connection to the past Grandpa thought was lost forever. He took her in because that's what good men do. He protected her because that's what strong men do. He found his voice again because that's what love demands, that we speak up for those who can't." From that single act of kindness, look what grew. Schools across Texas, laws protecting the vulnerable, families formed from strangers, voices raised where silence once reigned. He taught us that silence has its place, in respect, in listening, in peace. But he also taught us that some silences must be broken, the silence of injustice, of abandonment, of grief that paralyzes. Today, as we lay him to rest beside the family he lost and found and made, remember this: we are all pregnant strangers, at some point, carrying burdens we can't bear alone. We are all silent cowboys sometimes, locked in our own pain. But we can choose, always choose, to break that silence with kindness, to carry each other home. They buried him as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of ending and beginning. Rosa placed white roses on his coffin, descendants of the ones she'd taught to grow in the desert. Each family member added their own tribute. Eli left his first legal brief, Maria her champion riding ribbon, William his business ledger showing the school's success. Little Samuel, Billy's youngest brother, placed a simple drawing, stick figures. Holding hands labeled "My Family," it showed dozens of people all connected, spreading across the page like roots from a single tree. "That's Grandpa in the middle," he explained, "and Grandma, and all of us growing from them." After the service, the family gathered at the ranch. The house that had once sheltered a silent cowboy and a desperate woman now overflowed with their legacy. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and all the chosen family gathered along the way. Rosa, matriarch now, stood on the porch where so many crucial moments had played out. "Your grandfather," she said, "proved that one act of kindness can echo through generations, that silence broken can free hundreds of voices, that strangers can become family if we just open our doors and our hearts." As night fell, they told stories about finding the photograph, about the first word, stay, about facing down Valdez, building the schools, welcoming Maylene, expanding the family beyond all boundaries of blood or tradition. And always they returned to that first moment, a silent cowboy lifting a fallen woman, not knowing she carried his salvation along with his brother's child. "The past never dies in silence," they said together, the family motto now. "It lives in the voices we raise and the love we choose." In the cemetery, under stars that had witnessed it all, the wind stirred through the roses. And perhaps, just perhaps, if you listened closely, you could hear echoes of all the voices freed, because one man chose kindness over isolation, because one woman chose trust over despair, because together they chose to build rather than break. The Boone legacy lived on, in laws protecting the vulnerable, in schools educating the forgotten, in families formed from fragments. But mostly it lived in the simple truth Billy had shared. We are all strangers sometimes. We all carry burdens. We all need someone to see us fall and choose to lift us up. The water trough still stands in Dry Hollow, though the town has grown around it. The plaque has been expanded to include the names of all who've stopped to help through the years. At the top, in letters worn smooth by touching Caleb and Rosa Boone, 1882, they taught us to break the silence. And still, when strangers fall, someone stops. Someone lifts, someone carries them home. Because that's what family does, and in the end, if we're brave enough, kind enough, willing enough to break our silences, we're all family. The desert blooms with roses still. Children learn in schools, built from sorrow transformed. And somewhere in whatever comes after, a silent cowboy and the pregnant stranger who saved him, watch their legacy spread like sunrise across the land. Light breaking through darkness, voices breaking through silence, love breaking through loss. Forever and always, until the last silence falls and every voice is free. Sometimes the ones who say the least carry the loudest truths. If you enjoyed the story, consider sending a super chat to help bring more stories like this. Now, click on the video on the screen to hear a story even better than this one, with courage, sacrifice, and a choice that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice. The past never dies in silence. How will you break? Yours.